Hello and welcome. This is video number one in a three-part series about fascism. In today's video, we're going to take a look at just the rise of fascism as a political movement, and then take a look at how it took shape in Italy, really the origin of fascism. So with that, let's get started. All right, so first of all, I just want to speak a little bit to the time and conditions. With the rise of fascism, we're talking about something that developed shortly after World War I was finished, and then would continue to be a thing moving forward, really in some respects through today. It's a movement that exists in different ways in different places at different times. Now, what this ultimately represents with places that developed a fascist way of doing things would be a change or a break from a more democratic style system. So, for example, you get issues like the tough post-World War I years in the early 1920s. You get the Great Depression period that made a lot of the 1930s very difficult for places around the world. With those challenging times, you had some places that maintained their democratic style traditions, take places like the United States, take places like Great Britain. But one of the things that you have a tendency to get when times are tough is you have a greater openness by more people to something more extreme or intense that promises to solve the problems that people are facing. And so with fascism, basically it represents a really intense viewpoint and an intense set of ideas for how to take a rough situation and make it better. And so as we talk about fascism, the focus we'll give will be to Italy in today's video, and then in a couple of later videos, I'll take a look at Germany and how fascism played a role in how Germany evolved with the leadership of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. All right, so the first thing I want to speak to is just try to describe what fascism is. And it is a term that gets used a lot in our culture today. And I think in many cases it's often misused. For example, someone who disagrees with you or sees things differently than you is not necessarily a fascist. And someone who is calling someone a fascist because they disagree with them may actually be a fascist. So the way it gets used today and what it's used to describe, and people who are described as being fascist or whatever, if you understand characteristics of fascism, I hope you'll be able to see that a lot of what people characterize as fascism today is not actually fascism, and some of the things that people characterized as freedom movements and I don't know, think are democratic are actually probably more fascist than anything else. So with that, let's talk a little bit about fascism. All right. So as I was saying, fascism can be difficult to define because it doesn't really have a defined place on the political spectrum. Some people claim or say that fascism is a right-wing perspective. Others may say it's a left-wing perspective. And for both, people are correct in some respects, but also incorrect in some respects, whichever way they're trying to point it. Because there are elements of many different political perspectives that can be found with fascism. So I think the best way to try to understand what it is to kind of walk through some of the key characteristics. So first of all, it is a militant political movement. And basically what that means is the military and just force generally are seen and felt throughout the system. That a lot of emphasis ends up being placed on strength and ways to show force and strength. People in a given country are expected to show absolute loyalty to the state. Again, that just means loyalty to the country. I suppose in the very small scale, it would be to show loyalty to the movement itself. And also an expectation would be absolute loyalty to whoever the leader is at the time. Extreme nationalism is definitely a part of fascism. That basically means extreme loyalty and focus to your own country. And there are a lot of different ways that this can be demonstrated, maybe engaging in rallies to show support for your country, uniform wearing, basically just ways that you can overtly show the support to the state. Keeping it to yourself is not something that works in fascism. You're expected to be very vocal and very clear about your support. With fascism, the leader usually rules in some kind of a dictator type role with absolute power using methods consistent with what you find in totalitarianism. Only one political party is allowed. Whatever the leader's party is, that's all that's allowed. When it comes to property and businesses are allowed to be privately held. However, they only get to operate freely by doing what the leader asks of them. And if you promote the state, you basically get to do what you want. If you don't promote the state, you don't get to exist. And anyone or anything that doesn't promote the good of the country in the eyes of the leader usually ends up being forced to change, or they simply get eliminated. So very intense, very extreme. Some people will try to compare fascism to communism, and that's not necessarily easy to do. There are some ways in which they compare, but certainly ways that they don't. Focusing on differences, fascism is a nationalist movement, whereas communism is an international movement. So fascism focuses on their own country, their own state. Communism seeks to expand beyond their boundaries. Fascism does allow for a class system. It generally sees the need for different roles for people to have in society. Communism seeks to have a classless society. So depending on how communism plays out, there may be some similarities with some of the expectations for allegiance to a leader and that type of thing. But in kind of bigger picture ways, there are clear differences between the two. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about today was the rise of fascism in Italy, because it really is out of Italy and Benito Mussolini that fascism emerges as a thing. All right, so Italy, if we think back to World War I, was on the winning side of World War I, but that didn't necessarily mean that Italy was happy with the outcome of the war, or that they were doing very well after the war. Italy hoped, by being on the victorious side, to gain extra territory outside of just the boundaries of Italy, but it didn't get that. And then, like a lot of people, whether you're on the winning side or not, the people of Italy faced really difficult times. Inflation and unemployment were big issues, and that led to a lot of people becoming antsy and upset about what the future might be. And so the democratic style government that Italy was trying to adopt after the war was being viewed by a growing number of people as the time went by as being very ineffective with dealing with Italy's problems. And people were getting more and more open as time would go by to a strong leader with strong, forceful policies. And so for Benito Mussolini, he was really in the right place at the right time. As far as before he became a dictator, he had experience being a newspaper editor and also as a politician. So he was somebody well experienced with getting the message out to the people. He was the one that really started this fascist party as early as 1919, and basically he promised that he would provide the leadership that Italy need to fix Italy's economic problems and restore Italy's military to greatness. And as conditions got worse in Italy, his popularity grew. So for Mussolini, bad times equaled more attention for him. And with fascism, the way it works is some people you are going to win over with ideas. For people that weren't necessarily won over by the ideas that he espoused, his black shirts, as they were called, were people that were used to intimidate people to either get on their side or at least get out of the way. And one of the things that did take shape is over time, you started to see a growing number of people legitimately express some support for Mussolini from all different backgrounds in Italy. Now, the big moment where things really change in Italy is in October of 1922. You have an event where about 30,000 fascists, supporters of Mussolini, marched on Rome to support him and to push for him being able to be in charge of the Italian government. Now, at the time, there was a role of king for a guy named Victor Emmanuel III at this point in time, who did have the authority to put Mussolini or allow Mussolini to have a legitimate leadership position with Italy. Now, the king didn't necessarily want Mussolini in a position of power, but he felt that by putting Mussolini in a position of power, it was going to be his best opportunity to preserve his own position as king. So really with that, with this kind of show of support and show of force, Mussolini was allowed by the king in Italy to have a leadership role, a legitimate leadership role in Italy. Now, once in power, he was referred to as Il Duce, meaning the leader. He made all other political parties other than the Fascist Party illegal. Only the Fascist Party was allowed. There was no more even hint of democracy whatsoever in Italy. Anyone that opposed him or the fascists were put in jail. That was best case scenario. All forms of communication were required to print or broadcast just what Mussolini said for them to print or broadcast. So there was no freedom of expression or freedom of press or anything like that. And though he would technically hold the power and act like he held a lot of power, one thing that he would struggle with would be to truly be completely in control of Italy. The next person we'll be talking about, Adolf Hitler, will do a more thorough job of controlling the country. Nevertheless, fascism under Mussolini created a bit of a model that would be followed by others, especially as we begin talking about Germany and the rise of Hitler and the Nazis next. So hopefully this was helpful to have a better understanding about fascism and what it is. Thanks for watching.